From a very young age, some people sense that they experience the world differently. While others move through life focused on events, achievements, and conversations, empaths often find themselves deeply affected by the emotions behind those experiences. They don't just notice when someone is sad, frustrated, anxious, or joyful, they feel it. For many years, they may assume that everyone experiences emotions with the same intensity. They believe that everyone walks into a room and instantly notices tension between people. They think everyone can sense when a smile is hiding pain or when silence carries a story that hasn't been spoken. The awakening phase begins when an empath slowly realizes that this isn't the case. At first, this realization can be confusing. An empath may wonder why certain situations affect them so strongly while others seem untouched. They may leave social gatherings feeling emotionally exhausted, even when nothing dramatic happened. They may carry the weight of someone else's bad day as if it were their own. They may find themselves replaying conversations in their minds, worrying about whether they hurt someone's feelings or missed a hidden cry for help. What makes this phase so significant is that it changes the way an empath sees both themselves and the world around them. Suddenly, experiences that never made sense begin to connect. The emotional overwhelm, the deep concern for others, the difficulty ignoring suffering, and the tendency to absorb the moods of those nearby all start to form a clear picture. They realize they are not simply too sensitive. They are experiencing life through a lens of heightened emotional awareness. This awareness can be both a gift and a challenge. One of the first things an empath notices during this awakening is how much energy other people influence. Being around positive, kind, and supportive individuals often feels uplifting and inspiring. But being around negativity, anger, criticism, or emotional chaos can feel draining in ways that are difficult to explain. While others may be able to brush off a hostile interaction and move on, an empath often carries the emotional residue long after the moment has passed. As they become more aware of this pattern, they begin paying attention to the environments they enter. They notice that certain places leave them feeling calm and energized, while others leave them restless and emotionally depleted. They start understanding that emotional energy affects them just as much as physical circumstances. Another important part of this phase is the growing ability to recognize what others are feeling, even when nothing is said aloud. Empaths often develop a strong intuition. They can sense discomfort behind forced laughter. They can detect sadness hidden beneath confidence. They can feel tension in relationships before anyone speaks about it. This isn't magic. It is the result of years of unconsciously observing emotional cues, body language, tone of voice, and subtle behavioral changes. Yet this ability often comes with a burden. Because empaths feel connected to the emotions of others, they frequently take on responsibilities that were never theirs to carry. They become listeners, helpers, advisors, and caretakers. People naturally gravitate toward them because they feel understood. Friends share secrets. Strangers open up unexpectedly. Family members rely on them for emotional support. At first, this can feel rewarding. Helping others brings a sense of purpose. Being the person who understands creates meaningful connections. But during the awakening phase, empaths begin noticing an uncomfortable truth. While they spend so much time caring for others, they often neglect their own emotional needs. Many empaths become experts at understanding everyone except themselves. They know when someone else is hurting, but struggle to acknowledge their own pain. They encourage others to rest, yet ignore their own exhaustion. They offer compassion freely, but rarely extend the same kindness inward. This imbalance often becomes impossible to ignore as self-awareness grows. The awakening phase also reveals another difficult reality. Not everyone values empathy the same way. Some people appreciate kindness and respect emotional depth. Others may take advantage of it. Empaths may find themselves giving endless chances, excusing harmful behavior, or staying in unhealthy relationships because they understand the wounds behind another person's actions. As awareness increases, they begin recognizing the difference between understanding someone's pain and accepting mistreatment. This realization can be painful because it challenges long-held beliefs about love, loyalty, and compassion. At the same time, awakening often brings a powerful sense of validation. Many experiences that once felt confusing suddenly make sense. The empath no longer sees their sensitivity as a flaw. They begin understanding that their emotional depth allows them to connect, care, and perceive life in extraordinary ways. They notice beauty where others see ordinary moments. They appreciate genuine human connection. They value authenticity over appearances. They understand that emotions are not weaknesses, but important signals that help people navigate life. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of this phase is the realization that sensitivity is not something that needs to be fixed. For years, many empaths are told they are too emotional, too caring, too affected by the world around them. They may spend a great deal of energy trying to become harder, colder, or less responsive. But awakening teaches a different lesson. The goal is not to feel less. The goal is to understand what you feel and learn how to manage it wisely. An empath's sensitivity becomes powerful when paired with awareness. Instead of being controlled by every emotion they encounter, they learn to observe, understand, and respond intentionally. They begin discovering that emotional intelligence is one of the greatest strengths a person can possess. The awakening phase is not the end of the journey. It is the moment the journey truly begins. It is the point where confusion turns into understanding, where self-doubt gives way to self-acceptance, and where a person finally recognizes the unique gift they have carried all along. What once felt like a burden starts revealing itself as a source of wisdom, connection, and purpose, opening the door to a deeper and more meaningful relationship with both themselves and the world around them. There comes a moment in the life of nearly every empath when their greatest strength begins to feel like their greatest burden. For years, they have been the listener, the helper, the one who stays late to comfort a friend, answers every call, and puts everyone else's needs ahead of their own. They have carried emotional weight that was never truly theirs, believing that helping others was simply part of who they were. Then one day, something changes. The energy they once gave so freely begins to run out. This is the breaking point phase, the hardest phase of all. It rarely happens overnight. Instead, it builds slowly, through years of emotional investment, constant self-sacrifice, and the belief that being a good person means always being available for everyone. An empath often doesn't notice the damage at first, because helping others feels natural. They find purpose in being needed. They feel responsible for easing pain, solving problems, and keeping peace wherever they go. But every burden has a limit. Over time, the empath begins to feel emotionally exhausted. They wake up tired even after sleeping. Small problems feel overwhelming. Situations they once handled with patience now leave them frustrated and drained. The emotional reserve they depended on for so long starts running dangerously low. One of the most painful realizations during this phase is discovering that not everyone gives back what they receive. The empath looks around and notices a pattern. They have spent years supporting people through difficult times, yet when they need support themselves, many of those same people are nowhere to be found. The phone becomes quieter. The concern disappears. The empathy they offered so generously is not always returned. This realization can be heartbreaking, not because the empath expected rewards, but because they believed the relationships were balanced. They believed the care they gave was mutual. Discovering otherwise forces them to question many of the connections they once trusted. At the same time, they begin noticing how often they ignore their own needs. They have become so skilled at reading other people's emotions that they have lost touch with their own. They know when someone else is hurting, but cannot remember the last time they asked themselves how they were truly feeling. The breaking point often arrives when the empath can no longer suppress this truth. They realize they have spent years rescuing others while abandoning themselves. This realization creates an internal conflict. Part of them wants to keep helping because compassion is deeply rooted in their nature. Another part of them feels exhausted and desperate for relief. They find themselves caught between who they have always been and who they need to become. Many empaths experience guilt during this phase. They feel guilty for wanting space, guilty for saying no, guilty for putting themselves first, guilty for not answering every message immediately, guilty for needing rest. The strange thing is that they would never judge someone else for these same actions. They would encourage others to establish healthy boundaries. Yet when it comes to themselves, they often believe self-care is selfish. This belief becomes one of the biggest obstacles they must overcome. As emotional fatigue grows, the empath may also begin experiencing disappointment in ways they never expected. They realize that understanding someone's pain does not automatically excuse harmful behavior. For years, they may have tolerated disrespect because they understood the wounds behind it. They may have stayed in one-sided friendships because they knew the other person was struggling. They may have accepted treatment they would never wish on someone they loved. Eventually, compassion alone is no longer enough to justify the cost. The empath starts seeing a difficult truth. Understanding someone is not the same as carrying them. They are not responsible for fixing every broken person they meet. They are not responsible for managing everyone else's emotions. They are not responsible for sacrificing their peace so others can avoid facing their own challenges. This understanding can feel almost shocking because it challenges years of deeply ingrained habits. For the first time, the empath begins pulling back. They answer fewer calls. They stop volunteering for every emotional crisis. They create distance from relationships that constantly drain them. They start protecting their time, energy, and mental well-being. And surprisingly, not everyone reacts positively. Some people become upset when the empath establishes boundaries. Those who benefited from unlimited access often resist the change. The empath may be accused of becoming selfish, distant, or uncaring. These accusations hurt because they strike directly at the empath's identity. Yet this phase teaches one of life's most important lessons. Healthy boundaries reveal who respects you and who only values what you provide. The breaking point is painful because it feels like the collapse of an old version of yourself. The role of constant rescuer no longer works, but the healthier version of who you are has not fully emerged yet. It is a season of uncertainty, emotional discomfort, and profound self-discovery. Yet hidden within this struggle is the beginning of transformation. The empath starts realizing that true compassion includes themselves. They learn that constantly absorbing the pain of others does not make them stronger. They learn that exhaustion is not proof of love. They learn that sacrifice is not the same as connection. Most importantly, they begin understanding that their worth is not measured by how much they can endure for other people. The breaking point feels like an ending, but it is actually a turning point. It is the moment when an empath finally recognizes that carrying everyone else's emotional weight is impossible. No matter how caring, understanding, or compassionate they are, they cannot save every person they meet. What they can do is offer kindness without losing themselves, support others without abandoning their own needs, and care deeply without carrying burdens that were never theirs to bear. And in that realization, the exhausted empath begins to reclaim the peace they have spent so many years giving away. After the breaking point comes something many empaths never thought was possible: transformation. At first, it doesn't feel like transformation. It feels uncomfortable. It feels unfamiliar. It feels like stepping away from habits that have defined you for most of your life. For years, you measured your value by how much you could give, how many people you could help, and how much emotional weight you could carry. You became accustomed to being available, understanding, and self-sacrificing. Then something changes. You begin to realize that surviving is not the same as living. The exhaustion that once consumed you becomes impossible to ignore. The emotional burnout that pushed you to your limits leaves behind an important lesson. You finally understand that if you continue giving everything away, there will eventually be nothing left for yourself. This realization marks the beginning of transformation. Unlike the awakening phase where you discover your sensitivity, and unlike the breaking point phase where that sensitivity overwhelms you, the transformation phase is where you learn to work with your gift instead of being controlled by it. One of the first lessons an empath learns during this stage is that boundaries are not barriers. For years, boundaries may have seemed selfish. You may have worried that saying no would hurt people or make them think you no longer cared. But experience has taught you something different. You discover that boundaries are acts of self-respect. They are not walls designed to keep people out. They are guidelines that protect your emotional well-being. They allow you to remain compassionate without becoming consumed by the struggles of everyone around you. For perhaps the first time in your life, you start saying no when something feels wrong. You stop agreeing to commitments that drain your energy. You stop allowing guilt to dictate every decision. You begin recognizing that every time you say yes to something unhealthy, you are saying no to your own peace. This shift may seem small from the outside, but internally it changes everything. As your boundaries strengthen, you begin noticing something remarkable. The constant emotional noise that once surrounded you starts becoming quieter. You no longer feel responsible for fixing every problem. You no longer believe every crisis requires your intervention. You stop carrying emotional burdens that belong to other people. This doesn't make you less caring. It makes your compassion healthier. One of the greatest misconceptions about empaths is that they must absorb pain in order to help others. During the transformation phase, you learn that this simply isn't true. You can understand someone's suffering without making it your own. You can support someone without sacrificing your stability. You can listen without carrying their pain long after the conversation ends. This distinction becomes one of the most liberating discoveries of your life. You begin recognizing where your emotions end and where another person's emotions begin. What once felt like a tangled web of emotional experiences gradually becomes clearer. Instead of absorbing everything automatically, you learn to observe, understand, and release. At the same time, your relationship with yourself begins to change. For years, your attention was focused outward. You worried about everyone else's happiness, struggles, and emotional needs. Now you start turning some of that care inward. You begin asking yourself important questions. What do I need? What makes me feel peaceful? What relationships nourish me instead of draining me? What environments help me thrive? These questions may sound simple, but for many empaths, they are revolutionary. They represent a shift from constant self-sacrifice towards self-awareness. As you spend more time understanding yourself, you also begin reconnecting with parts of your identity that may have been neglected for years. You rediscover interests, passions, and dreams that were pushed aside while caring for everyone else. You remember that your life is meant to be lived, not merely given away. Another powerful change occurs during this phase. Your intuition becomes sharper. When you are constantly overwhelmed by emotional noise, it can be difficult to trust your inner voice. Everything feels urgent. Every emotion demands attention. But as your boundaries improve and your emotional balance returns, your natural intuition becomes easier to hear. You begin recognizing red flags sooner. You notice unhealthy patterns before they become major problems. You trust your instincts